d4 is white's most popular alternative to e4 games. Although typically not as fast-paced as many e4 openings, d4 is a rich opening move with many positional and attacking ideas. Let's take a look at some of the most common openings after d4. After d4, white is ready to play e4 on the next turn, so black's most solid defense is preventing this idea with d5. White will sometimes play moves like bishop f4, known as the London system, but white's most direct and popular plan is to put pressure on d5 right away with c4. This opening is known as the Queen's Gambit. White wants to remove black's pawn on d5 so that white can play e4 and gain more space in the center. Black's two most popular responses to the Queen's Gambit defend the d5 pawn with either e6 or c6. But sometimes black captures the pawn with d takes c4, known as the Queen's Gambit accepted. Black typically does not get a good position by trying to hold on to the extra pawn on c4, but the main idea behind giving up the center is to open up the d-file to place pressure on d4. White will usually take over the center with e4, planning on rapid development and trying to prevent black from comfortably developing. Giving up the center is usually a risky decision, so black more often protects the d5 pawn with one of the next two opening ideas. When black plays c6, this opening is known as the Slav defense. Black protects the d5 pawn, so if white captures on d5, black can recapture with a pawn and still control the center. After knight to f3 and knight to f6, white usually plays knight to c3. Black has a choice to make the opening a Slav or a semi-Slav defense. How do we know which opening is which? The Slav defense is when black develops the light-squared bishop before playing the move e6. The semi-Slav defense is when black keeps the bishop on c8 and plays e6. If black wants to play the Slav defense, which means developing the light-squared bishop before playing e6, black should play d takes c4. If black plays bishop f5 immediately, white has the tricky c takes d5. And after c takes d5, white now plays queen to b3. Notice that white's queen attacks b7 and adds a second attacker to the d5 pawn. Black can play b6, but this weakens light squares in black's territory. Black could retreat the light-squared bishop back to c8, maybe black's best choice, or try queen to b6, protecting the b7 pawn and attacking white's queen. White can win a pawn after knight takes d5. And if black trades queens with queen takes b3, hoping that white will immediately capture the queen and then lose the knight on d5, white has the very nice in-between move, knight to f6 check. And white has won a pawn after all of the trades. This explains why black plays d takes c4 first. Black captures the pawn and is threatening to hold on to the pawn with b5. So white typically plays a4, preventing b5. White is ready to play e4 and take over the center, so black will play bishop to f5, developing the bishop toward the center and protecting the e4 square. This is the main line of the Slav defense. White will often play e3, protecting the d4 pawn and preparing to recapture black's pawn on c4 with the light-squared bishop. Both sides will focus on completing development and castling. If black does not play the Slav defense by developing the light-squared bishop before playing e6, black's other main idea is to play the semi-Slav defense with e6. Black builds a very solid structure in which both e6 and c6 protect the d5 pawn. Black can play solid developing moves aimed at controlling the center, such as knight b to d7 and bishop to d6. White can play the slow but solid e3, adding protection to the center and protecting the c4 pawn, but this move does block the dark squared bishop. Or white can play the more aggressive bishop to g5, pinning black's knight and placing pressure on the center. Black can play the solid bishop to e7, unpinning the knight, or challenge white by playing d takes c4, surrendering the center but trying to keep a pawn after e4 and b5. Play becomes incredibly sharp after e5. Attacking the pinned knight on f6, black fights back with h6, counterattacking white's bishop, which is pinning the knight. After bishop to h4, black plays g5, breaking the pin on the f6 knight. Incredible complications follow, where both sides must know exactly what they are doing to avoid entering a bad or losing position. The other popular option to defend the d5 pawn is by playing e6. This is known as the Queen's Gambit declined. Black protects d5 with a pawn, securing black's control of the center. The only drawback is that the light-squared bishop on c8 will have issues developing. After knight to c3 and knight to f6, both sides develop knights toward the center and focus on the d5 and e4 squares. White now has a couple of options. Sometimes white plays knight to f3 and bishop to f4, placing pressure on c7 as well as the queen side in general. The more traditional move is bishop to g5, developing a piece and pinning the knight to the queen. Black plays bishop to e7, unpinning the knight and preparing to castle. One common line of play is e3. White controls the center and prepares to complete kingside development, and after castles, unlike e4, e5 openings, when white's light-squared bishop often moves to c4 to enjoy the open diagonal pointing toward black's castled king, notice in d4, d5 openings, that diagonal is blocked by the d5 pawn. Can you see a more active diagonal for white's light-squared bishop? That's right, the b1 to h7 diagonal. White will plan on developing the bishop to d3, move the knight to f3, and castle. Black, on the other hand, has to decide what to do with the light-squared bishop. A popular plan for black is to play b6, planning to develop the bishop to b7 and protect the pawn on d5 and help control the center. The Queen's Gambit declined is a safety-first opening where black builds a strong center around the d5 square and tries to prevent white from favorably opening up the center with e4. After exploring the main ideas behind d4, d5, let's go to the challenges.